Okay, good evening everyone. And it actually is the evening time. And we've got daylight, which is really good because we can work later and do some videos like this in the evening time. So it's Saturday today. I've had some cars out. I've been taking some photos for advertisements. I've been doing the 997 there, the 991 there, and a 996 C4S. They'll be up later, well, probably tomorrow now. But that car there is the first 991 that we've had in stock. And while I was photographing it, I just thought it'd be quite nice to do a video on it and kind of give my first impressions and some differences between that and its predecessor, the 997, sat alongside it. So, to start us off, I guess, the size of the thing. Now, just in the shot there, I think you can tell it is notably bigger. So the dimensions, roughly, it's 2 inches longer, it's 2 inches wider, but most significantly, its wheel span is 4 inches longer. So the length between the front wheel and the rear wheel is 4 inches longer than on the 997. So if we go through the physical appearance of the thing in comparison to start with, from the front end, they're actually very similar, aren't they? We've got the intakes both sides of the radiators, which has those infamous aircon condensers there, still with no protection, look. The headlights are very similar, but from the side profile, they do bulge out more than the 997, which has a flatter lens on it. The side lights are in the same location down there, of course. And the shape of the bonnet is the same. The shut line is in the same location. But if we look at the back, it's not the same on the engine lid anymore. So I think they've tried to kind of tidy it up a little bit. So whereas here, we've got the bumper meeting the engine lid below the line of the lights, on the 997, they've tried to clean it up a little bit, haven't they? The top of the lights is the shut line for the engine lid and the bumper. Tailpipe tips are very similar. The dual tips both sides. The side profile silhouette of the 991 is still very similar. That classic 911 shape that they're never going to stray away from. But the door on the 991 is taller than that on the 997. So if you look there, between there and there, it's less than the 991. So you've got more glass height on the 997 than the 991. For the first time, 20-inch wheels as standard. These wheels actually remind me of a style from the 996, the base model 17-inch ones. But I think that increase in size to 20 inches maybe encourages the size of the car looking bigger. It just looks like a more bulky object with those 20-inch wheels. Now, something I think that they've greatly improved on the 991, and people are going to think I'm being pedantic here, is I often mention how I'm not very partial to a sunroof on these cars. I just think that that sunroof there with that extra line going around the roof just clutters it a bit and kind of just, it's not as clean. So for me, I prefer without a sunroof, and that's the main reason for it. On the 991, they've made the sunroof that much bigger. You can barely tell it's there, can you? So again, like we were talking about with the rear of the car, tidying up the panel gaps, they've made the sunroof the full width of the roof, and so you've still just got this one single line rather than the additional line from it being on the inside somewhere. So it looks really nice and clean along the roof line, but you've got the sunroof. Let's talk about some of the features of the cars, and I'm going to start with the keys. So here we go. 991 key to the left, 997 key to the right. I'm not a fan of either, to be honest with you. The 997 key to the right just looks very dated now, and the 991 key to the left, in the shape of a 911, I guess, I think that's a bit gimmicky. I'd have rathered they just modernised the old 997 key. There you are. There's the keys. Here's something I really don't like with what they've done with the 991. So here we are in the back of the 997, in the engine compartment. There you go. There's the 3.8 litre flat six. There's not a great deal we can see. We can't exactly see the cam covers or anything like we could in an old air-cooled one. It's basically just airbox, but we can see some of the engine. Shut that down, go over to the 991, and you guessed it, lift up the lid, and they've totally made away with the ability to actually see any part of the engine. Oh look, the damping struts are worn out, much like a 996. Anyway, I digress. There's no engine to be seen. Really, really don't like that. Porsche, please bring back the engine compartment. So jumping inside the 991 then, and clearly it has been greatly modernised. And to be honest with you, they've done a really good job. It is a nicer place to be, in my opinion, than the 997. But saying that, all the knobs and the switches and the positioning of everything, and even the font on the switches and so forth, is almost identical. Porsche have a tendency of doing that. They don't fix what isn't broken. So for example, the electric seat switches are in the same location, are the same actually. And the electric windows we were just looking at. The handle, although they've changed the design ever so slightly, it's very similar and it's in the same location. Most importantly, they've stuck to their trademark 5-dial binnacle, of course. Porsche have always had 5 dials. They've always had the rev counter slap bang in the middle, because of course that's the most important one to be keeping an eye on when you're driving a 911. The font's exactly the same. I suppose the main difference in here is the raised centre console. So traditionally, the 911's always had it flat here. For the first time, they've raised this unit, and it's reminding me actually of a Tesla centre console. Not that I've been in many Teslas. Of course, we've got the improved and later PCM unit. Something I like actually, for the first time, they've made away with the bottom section in carpet. So the 997, about up to there, is in carpet, and it was starting to look a bit dated. So that looks nice. I've also noted on the Alcantara suede headlining, of course you get that in the predecessor, but then the A-pillar was in like a plastic or a leather, and on this they've just continued the suede Alcantara, and that looks really nice. Now, one gripe I do have is the electric handbrake. Now, I understand that cars are going over to electric handbrakes now, and so that's fine. I can get to grips with that, but I would rather a mechanical lever. But what I don't understand with this, with what Porsche have done, is to me, when you're putting a handbrake on, you pull the handbrake up. But with this switch, I'll get in and show you, you put your foot on the brake and you actually push it away from you to turn the handbrake on, and you pull it towards you to turn it off. That's a bit backward to me. I don't really understand why Porsche have done it that way around. There we go, you can hear the parking sensors beeping at me because I've got the plates over the front plate. So for the first time, we've got front parking sensors as well as rear. Anyway, even I'm getting bored of hearing my own voice now, so let's get out on the road. I am going to go for a drive now, but a feature I just wanted to demonstrate, and it's better that I do that now before I go out on the road, is the sports mode. So 991s all come with sports mode. This car doesn't have PSE, which is Porsche switchable exhaust, so you can get that on the 991 just like you could get it on the 997 before it and the 996 before that. And essentially what that is, you click the button, it opens a valve in the exhaust, bypasses some of the muffles within the back box and makes a louder exhaust note. This car doesn't have it. However, the sport mode now on the 991, unlike the 997 before it, if you click it, it won't just adjust the mapping on the throttle, which the 997 did. It also changes the sound of the car. So hang on, I'm gonna turn it off to start with. Rev the engine a little bit, it's been warmed up. Now if I put sports mode on, we've got a lot of crackles going on. So basically, it's dumping unburnt fuel into the exhaust and making that noise, which is rather nice. I do quite like that actually. Let's get on the road. Straight off the bat then, we did mention the size difference between this and its predecessor, the 997. And coming down the country lane that leads to FGP HQ, it does feel that much bigger. So this car's coming now, and it does feel a little bit like the road's narrower than it usually is when I'm driving a 996 or 997. It's 2 inches wider and 2 inches longer, so it does make a little bit of a difference. I mean, it's not a colossal car. My everyday Touareg still feels much bigger. Probably not wider, but bigger. And I had an R35 Nissan GTR recently for personal use, and that felt bigger than this. So yeah, it's not colossal. So what about the driving position then? Now it feels very similar to the 997 and even the 996 before it. I always have the seat flat on the floor, like I've got here, and the seating position feels exactly as it does in the 997 when I've set it up as I like it. Everything's kind of centered around you. So it's all centred around the driver in the cockpit. Porsche haven't altered that at all. Like I was saying before, the switches and dials and everything is all in the same position, so it's very familiar. The steering wheel has much more adjustment on it. So in a 997, I have the steering wheel as far out as it will allow me to bring it. But in this, it's got more adjustment. I can have the steering wheel far closer. I've got it actually set quite far back relative to the amount of adjustment that's there. The door card, I feel as if I'm lower down in the car here, but I'm not. The reason for it is we were speaking about the shape of the silhouette of the car prior when we were back at FGP, and the door comes up higher and the glass isn't as tall. It starts higher up. So I feel lower, but it's not obscuring my visibility, so I guess that's a bit of a moot point really. But the main difference in the driving position that I'm finding, because we spoke about that before too, is the centre console here. So having that raised centre console with the gear stick that much higher, particularly in a manual car, it feels different, and I'm really enjoying it. It feels a more natural position. It's less of a reaching for the gear stick. It feels a bit more like a race car, I guess. So I'm really enjoying that. It wouldn't be as noticeable in a PDK car because of course you wouldn't be reaching for the gear stick, but yeah, I'm liking that a lot. Other differences I'm noticing in the way that the car drives compared to the 997, the brake servo feels more assisted, so you don't have to stamp on that brake as much to make it really put some stopping force in. The brakes are great, but yeah, they do feel a bit different. They do feel more assisted than the previous car. With regard to the steering, now the 991 generation that I'm in now, it is the first of the 911s to have the electronic steering as opposed to the hydraulic steering in the previous 997 and the ones before it. And I am noticing you do lose a bit of that feel through the steering wheel. So I can't feel what the wheels on the road are doing as much as I can in a hydraulic steering 997, for example. So it numbs it a little bit. You can't feel the bumps as much, and you can't feel the cambers and so forth in the road. But nonetheless, it's got tremendous handling ability. It's got such grip. Right, a bit of open road now. I'm going to stick it in sports mode. Now you may or may not have heard when I stuck it into sports mode there that the car did get louder. Now what that is they've put basically a resonator pipe or tube from the intake towards the back of the car, towards the back of the cockpit, and when you put it in sports mode it opens up a valve and you get some more of that intake noise within the cabin. Now it does sound really good, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. It's a little bit gimmicky, isn't it? But it does sound good. Let me know what you think of that little feature in the comments, I guess. Now the steering and the handling with sports mode activated. Now the car comes with PASM, like the 997 before it did, Porsche Active Stability Management, and what that does is it stiffens the ride height, stiffens the shock absorbers, and makes a more sporty feeling car. Now I spoke about it in a few videos ago, I can't remember, it must be a couple of months ago now. I had two 997s and one was a rare thing. It came with the MO30 suspension package, which is a fixed damper rather than PASM. And I was talking about how I actually preferred that than the PASM car, because the PASM car, a lot of people say it's too crashy for them. And it is a crashy ride. When you're on a bumpy road, it's quite a crashy and bumpy ride. Now in this, what I've noticed immediately even with PASM mode on, it irons out the bumps much better than the 997 with PASM on. So the difference between the soft mode and the sports mode isn't as great as it is in the 997, and it's much more usable in this actually. So there you go, there is an improvement in my opinion. Right, I'm rapidly losing daylight now, so I'm going to put the thing in sports mode, traction control off, PSM off, and give it a bit of a belting and see what I really think of it. Of course, I've already given it a bit of a hard drive like this prior to the video, but here we go. Tell you what, it's a little bit harder to rev match in this, to heel and toe. I feel like the accelerator pedal's a bit further down than the brake relative to each other in the 997. It's got fantastic grip. That gear change from third to fourth, the revs, they barely drop. You can feel those ratios are closer to each other, and that of course is going to increase the acceleration. It's really nice. What I did forget to mention actually, that reminds me, revving it like that, is that when you put it in sports mode, it increases the rev limiter, so it allows you to rev that little bit higher. It also, you'll have seen us in previous videos fitting low temperature thermostats to 997s and 996s. In the 991, when you put it in sports mode, it allows the engine to run a little bit cooler. So it's got an electronic thermostat, and it will allow the water to pass through and around the engine at a lower temperature. So it just keeps it running a bit cooler when you're driving like this. That intake noise does sound good, produced through that resonator that goes into the cabin at the back. Alright, let's slow down. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's a 911, isn't it? Anyway, like I say, I'm losing daylight rapidly now. Although it is nice. What time is it? It's 6:30 and we still got a bit of daylight. We'll be out in the pub garden soon. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Our next video will be a more traditional format for us. So we'll be showing the prep work being done in the workshop, on the ramp, the parts being renewed and so forth. I'm sure I've missed lots of things off that the 991 has, that the 997 doesn't, and improvements and things that have made worse. So if there's people watching that have had both and I've missed something quite obvious, please let me know in the comment section. Yeah, until the next one, cheers.